Okay, yeah, I think it's recording. Um, so welcome everyone to today's paper club. Today I'm going to be presenting a paper out of Meta that I think hit LinkedIn last week or something because it was all on LinkedIn, and it's called Segment Anything. And it's claiming with really good results to be a foundation model for computer vision. I'm going to go into that. I actually, this paper, if you've had time to read it, it's not super technical in terms of the techniques used. I actually think there's probably like a lot of details that are missing if you wanted to just like implement this yourself. But the broad strokes, like a lot of the idea, all the main ideas are expressed. So I thought this would be a good paper club to actually kind of maybe foster a discussion and talk about the broader ideas in the paper. Um, Also because I recently have read a lot of the papers that are supposed to have inspired, like to describe how ChatGPT was created, and there's some like big ideas that are overlapping between these two papers, and I thought that was really interesting because um, I think that I don't know. I've heard for a long time from people when I was doing my master's in ML and just talking to invited speakers, they were talking about how they thought there would be an AI winter soon. That was 3 years ago, because we couldn't really generalize we couldn't get better, we weren't seeing like improvement past just using the existing architectures and supervised learning. And I think for a while that seemed true, but with that, like with ChatGPT being put out, and then also now this model, and then there's other things that have happened as well. I would say that we've kind of maybe discovered a new seam in AI that means that I don't think we're hitting a winter. We're actually going in the opposite direction, where like more and more people are wanting to use AI and it's becoming easier. So I just think that's an interesting element of this year, especially that we're going from a lot of people having thought that we were going into an AI winter to going into the opposite direction, where everyone wants to use it and it's very accessible. So anyway, before talking about the paper, I'll talk about foundation models first, because I think that's a good start. So at the end of the paper, they describe, I have to share my screen. I have to do that, sorry. Share screen, entire screen. Okay. Can someone, if you feel comfortable, unmute and just tell me that you can see the paper?
All good.
Okay, cool. So first, let's talk about what a foundation model is, because I think there's some interesting ideas there. So they define a foundation model in the conclusion, where they say foundation models. Foundation models are pre-trained models that have been adapted to downstream tasks since the early days of machine learning. This paradigm has become increasingly important in the recent years, with an emphasis on scale and such models being used on a wide range of downstream tasks. So I think that's the main way that this model fits into the idea of a foundation model. It's like a model that is trained to do something that's general enough that it can actually be used on a lot of downstream tasks. In the area of NLP, models like the GPT models are foundation models because they really can be applied to almost any NLP task. I think because most NLP tasks can be posed as like sequence to sequence problems. Here they point out that what they're doing is image segmentation, and how that isn't as general in the field of computer vision. So there's a lot more tasks. There's not like some, maybe not yet, or maybe never, there's no like so general a task in computer vision that you could pose every single problem as that problem, like you can do with NLP tasks, which are often sequence to sequence. So that's kind of the idea of a foundation model, just a model that can be applied to a lot of downstream tasks, and it's pre-trained. So right now, when we talk about foundation models and we're thinking about things, we're usually thinking about like ChatGPT or this, meaning that they can be applied without any fine tuning. That's kind of a newer element of what we're calling foundation models these days, where you can just apply it to a downstream task and it works. So that's like something that's been coming up in machine learning for a while, and that's kind of what this is. This model is claiming to be. And I guess I'd want to introduce the task of segmentation before I talk about like the broad strokes of the techniques used and how they're maybe similar to what was done in ChatGPT. So in computer vision, there's quite a few. Actually, I'm gonna mute one of you because I just hear it as the background and sorry. Yeah. Okay. So segmentation is the problem in computer vision of you get an image and you want to segment the different objects and objects and elements in the image. So down here are quite a few really amazing examples of segmentation, where you can see like a cloud is segmented if you look at my cursor, and then some boats, and even the sea. Or here's like another really cool one where it's literally food that's been segmented into, and the food has so many pieces in it. And you could ask yourself, why is this an important task in computer vision? And there's a lot of different reasons why this is an important, like, fundamental task. One, the main reason, in my opinion, that this is an important task has to do with a concept in machine learning called, I think in this case, it would be invariance. So say you have a cat that's got in Nepal, and you tell your model, tell me where the cat is. It should be able to identify the cat. And then say you switch to New York City and you say, tell me where the cat is. The background fundamentally changes there. And one of the issues that people in computer vision have been struggling with since its inception is that this background change is actually what's called a huge domain or distribution shift. But for the task of finding the cat, like, it shouldn't matter to the model that the background is different because the cat is still there. And for example, humans, if you put a human in like an alien planet and then where they'd never seen it before, and you put a cat there, you said point out the cat, they'd be able to point out the cat. So their ability to find the cat is invariant to the background or the place that the cat is in. And segmentation is a task which can allow you to, if you can segment an image into its components, that could allow you to do this type of, how do I say? That could make this invariance a lot easier. This is just one example of how it's valuable. There's tons. And I'm not a computer vision expert, so I'm sure someone who has done a lot more research would be able to give you an example. But for example, if you have a model that can segment an image, then you can just go through the segmented parts of the image individually and be like, is this a cat? Is this a cat? Is this a cat? And all of a sudden, you make it a lot easier for the model that you're using to identify the object or the entity that it's trying to identify, because you're able to segment the image into its components and just look at the components individually instead of having to look at the image as a whole. There's actually a use case that's not mentioned here, but it's one of the data sets. Like one thing that I think everyone in the world would like is if there was a robot that you could train to pick up trash on the street to make our cities and not at anywhere, not even on the street, but yeah, like a public robot that would pick up trash on the street. But that's actually kind of hard because like, how can the robot tell the difference between trash and something else? Or just distinguish between pieces of trash on the street. And they actually have this data set here that they've created called Zero Waste F, where they're kind of, it's one of the data sets, like one of the problems they're kind of trying to address. So if you could correctly segment an image for a robot so that it could look at things and be like, okay, this is the difference. This is an object and it's trash and it's not the sidewalk. Then you're much more likely to be able to do something like that. So there's downstream applications of this model. And then I also wanted to show you this model. So here's, you can go on to segmentanything.com and open their demo, and they have a couple of different examples. So of how this model works. So this model is a prompt-based model. Let's choose a different image just for fun. Let's go back. So this is a prompt-based model, and the prompts here are a number of different things. Let's try this one with all these plants. Okay, there's a couple of different prompts that you can use. And when we think of prompt, we usually think of it in terms of text. But here, the prompts that the model was trained on are actually either this one where you have a point and you just you click on something, you say, give me a segmentation mask for the object that this point is related to. Here, it's identified 2 potatoes. One cool thing is you can click multi-mask, and it will identify like the 2 potatoes that are part of it, and then the 1 potato. And the other one you can do is you can box things. So let's box these carrots and see what happens. Ooh, didn't do that well here. I do think I chose a hard one for it. I guess here it's able to find the green beans. But yeah, I guess it's better with the hovering click where you just give it a point and it does better. So yeah, I think one of the things that this highlights is how, I mean, the fact that this doesn't work even on an image that they've given us. I mean, it does work, but I mean, not as well as you would like, is how hard of a problem this is. It's called, in ML, it's called distribution shift, but like the amount of variation that you see in images is just massive. And finding a model that can just work the way that the human brain does, where it can distinguish things that it's seen once on a completely new background, is asking for like, it's a really hard problem, and they've been able to make a lot of progress on it. So anyway, I hope I've explained what the segmentation task is, and why it's hard, and then also kind of like some downstream ways that it's useful. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is the way that this model was developed. I'm gonna mute someone else real quick. Okay. So the way that this model was developed is really interesting, and it's similar to the way that ChatGPT was. Well, there's 2 different elements that are similar to ChatGPT in the way that this model was developed. The first one is the idea of prompt-based learning, or prompt-based task learning. So the way that ChatGPT, or actually it was GPT-3 where they introduced this, but GPT-3 was a predecessor of ChatGPT. The way that GPT-3 was trained is that they created this massive data set of like NLP data set where they had different tasks. So it might be something like, one data set might be adding numbers. So the prompt would be like, add these 2 numbers, and it would literally say add these 2 numbers, and it would give you like 10 plus 5, and then it would ask equals, 10 plus 5 equals, and the goal was for the model to to figure out how much it was. Another one would be, oh, there's so many simple examples. Maybe it would be like add these colors together. What does red and blue create? That's not one of. I wish I could remember. I read the paper a couple weeks ago, and my brain is a bit fried. But basically, they created this massive data set of different tasks that were defined by the prompt that they had. They'd engineered a prompt for, and the whole goal was that you gave the prompt and the problem related to the prompt, and then you asked the model to learn to predict like the next tokens, which were the answer to the prompt. And so here they've done the same thing, but instead of the prompt being text, the prompt is mainly two things, which they show here. Either they have a point, which is the prompt, or they have a box, like a bounding box, which is the prompt. And so they're using the same kind of information here. I think what it does is it helps focus, in the case of computer vision, it helps focus the model on a specific point or part of the image and say like, okay, I need to look here specifically to find the object that I'm going to segment. So that's the first element of this that's very similar to how large language models are trained today, or at least the ones that I think are best performing. And then the second component of it is that they collected a ton of data with the model in the loop. And that's not something that was used in ChatGPT, but that was something that was used, that wasn't something that was used in GPT-3, but that was something that was used to train ChatGPT. There's a predecessor to ChatGPT called InstructGPT, which is also a successor of GPT-3. And there, they hired like something like either 100 or 1,000 labelers to say their preference between text generated by the model and then some other text. And then they use this these labels of preference labels in an iterative cycle to train the model to get better and better and better at answering people's questions, essentially, or not answering people's questions, following instructions. And here they did the same thing. They pre-trained their model on like an existing data set. If we go over to the description, they pre-trained it on, where is it? Yeah, this segment is. It's okay. I'm sorry. I'll find it at some point. But they pre-trained it on a publicly available segmentation data set, or quite a few. And then what they do is they have 3 stages of how they train they collect data. So I'm going to go into those, but I want to stop here and point out the rest of the stuff I'm going to talk about are like specific to this project and not like a common theme between the two, like the ChatGPT foundation model and then this one. But I do think it's really interesting that that we have 2 large tech companies, which in 2 very different domains, computer vision and then NLP tasks, which are using essentially the same techniques. And also kind of the thing that I really like and I think makes sense is this idea of creating like human in the loop data collection to create foundation models which generalize like way past the data that was collected. So they did a lot here to collect good data for training their models. But unfortunately, I do think it creates a barrier to entry if this is really what's required to learn to create foundation models for smaller companies or individuals, because you need the resources in order to like create a data engine, as they call it here. But it is also cool because it shows you how you can basically collect and curate a massive data set to create a foundation model. So yeah. just some things I wanted to point out before we get into specifics. One thing I just remembered, and sorry for like the disorganization of this presentation. I'm just kind of like going as I think of things. Is another element of the foundation model. I'm just going to search for it. Yeah. Another element of this foundation model, which I think is kind of true in a way of all these large language models that you can view as foundation models, is that they're built in a compositional way, which means that in the case of this model, you can use it as part of a system where, for example, you could either take the outputs of the segmentation masks that are outputted and use them on a downstream model, or use another model as an input for this one to generate like the prompt in order to create maybe a model that doesn't require, like a model that requires even less information in order to generate good segmentation masks. So I think this is this is something you learn, I think, as best practice in programming, that you want to create functions which are compositional, because often they might be used for a lot more than just the use case that you program them for initially. But it's also an interesting thing to think about in machine learning, and maybe it's something to think about in your own research, that when I am doing my research, I want to create a model which is compositional, because then it can be used in a lot of different use cases as opposed to the specific one that I'm using it for. But that also depends what the goal of your research is. Like, you know, AlphaFold could not be used for anything except for calculating the tertiary structure of proteins. But it works so well that it's incredibly useful. Okay, so enough general talk. Let's get into it. Let's go to the top. Okay, I kind of talked about this. Maybe I'll just highlight again that one of the things that makes this a foundation model is that they evaluate the model on a number of downstream tasks. And I think this is really cool, and we'll go over it again in the results. And it outperforms models that are trained on the data set of the downstream task. So with no data from the downstream task, it outperforms models, or does as well as them, as models that were trained on that data set. We talked about how one of the main ideas here is a promptable segmentation task. To be very clear what the task is here, because that's like one of the main ideas. You're given either, I'll show you the architecture diagram, that helps. Okay, you're given one of 4 prompts, and actually they didn't train their model on text as a prompt. You're given one of 3 prompts during training. Either it's a mask, so it's literally masking out a component of the image and saying like, find the mask within this mask, a point where it's saying like, okay, find the point attached, the mask attached to this point, or a box where you say, find the box attached, or the mask attached to this box. And so you're given one of these 3 prompts, and then the task itself is specifically to output a valid segmentation mask. Often for a single point, there's many different valid segmentation masks. So for example, if you look here, if you put your point on this person's head, a valid segmentation mask could be the hat, it could be the person's head, it could be the entire person, because those are all like objects within the image that have the same point. So the goal of the model that it's being trained on is output a valid segmentation mask. It doesn't have to be a specific one. And so that's an important reason why it's so generalizable, because it's just saying like, learn to output valid segmentation masks. Yeah. One additional component of this method which makes sense, and maybe it's more of like something that you would see in industry than in research, is that it's possible to perform the task in real time. So you want to be able to, if you wanted to deploy this in a real-time system, especially for computer vision tasks, which often deal with video, where you're looking at multiple frames per second, you need it to go really fast in order for it to be useful. So I explained the task. Sorry, I've gotten it. And then the model that they want, they've just named the three requirements or functional requirements. They want it to be have flexible prompts, meaning that you can give it a lot of different prompts and it gives you a good answer. And that's in order to make it compositional. It needs to be real time because you want to be able to productionize it. And they want it to be ambiguity aware because, as I pointed out before, there's multiple, often for a single point or for a bounding box, or even for a text prompt, like in the picture we were looking at here. Imagine if you said, like, show me a potato segmentation mask. There's so many different. Oh wow, it really struggles with this stuff. But anyway, there's so many different masks that are possible. So anyway, these are the three components of the model, and this is how they kind of designed it. And then we'll talk about the data engine in depth. Before we talk about the data engine and the model, I don't think we really need to go into the task a little bit more. I did want to talk about the data set that they're providing. So through this data engine, which is basically a data collection system that they've designed, they were able to create a final data set that includes more than 1 billion masks and 11 million licensed and privacy preserving images. So that's a huge data set that I think may open up the problem a lot more to people.
Peter, sorry,
yeah?
there's a question in the chat.
Sorry. I wish this was like Zoom where I could just go like this.
I can try to read it out if that helps.
Yes. Yeah, that would be great. Could you read it out?
So Arnaud asks, if the constraint in training was find any valid segmentation task, then how was the selection of the mask decided? Different use cases could require different valid masks. How to pick the eventual deployment?
Okay. So I'll answer that in the training section of this problem. But just to answer it quickly here before that, the way it was trained, it was given multiple different masks for a single input, like for a single prompt. And then choosing the right one is actually maybe more of a downstream task you'd need to train another model for, because this model could literally give you, I don't know, 10 or many different valid segmentation masks, but it doesn't care which one is the one you actually want. And that's what makes it ambiguity aware. The whole point is that they want the model to be able to output only valid segmentation masks, but we don't really care about anything except for the fact that they're valid, and it would be a downstream task to figure out which one you actually want. So to generate, they've generated this new data set using their data engine, and it's huge and really useful. But I did want to highlight something about this because I think that there's one hidden element to, like, one of the wonderful things about AI is that as a community, people publish their research and they publish their results. And so, for example, we can talk about how ChatGPT was trained, and we can talk about how this model was trained. But, for example, OpenAI doesn't make their data sets public. So while we can talk about how they're trained and we have some idea, we couldn't train it ourselves, and we couldn't really further that work. Well, here, the data set is public, but it's public only for research purposes. So essentially, they've created a data set to help them improve their model, but you can't commercialize it. So any IP that's created off of the research for this model is going to, most likely it will be public and they'll just use it themselves. So while we are publishing a lot of work and we're getting to see how these models are being created, I do feel like these foundation models and like the really valuable AI that's being created is still controlled by large tech companies because they control the data sets, and they're probably not they're not going to release them for completely open source so anyone can take advantage of them. So I just wanted to highlight that because I think it's something that we should think about. Like, we're seeing so many things happen so fast because of these foundation models, but really the only people who are able to take advantage of it, like really earn money, are these large tech companies right now. So that's kind of like one of the ways in which our community, and understandably so, because we live in a capitalist society, like there's like these large barriers to entry where only basically the haves in terms of data, and which are rich tech companies, can really take advantage of the techniques that they're publishing. Anyway, that's my long aside done. Let's talk about the model, and then we'll talk about the data engine. So we talked about the task. This is still the introduction. Okay, the model. So the model has a couple of components which are shown here. It has an image encoder, which is a vision transformer with some adaptations. And then they have a couple of prompt encoders, which are just like positional encodings for points and boxes. And then this thing called a clip embedding, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later. And then for masks, for dense prompts like masks, which are here, they use a CNN. One thing that I thought was really interesting about the image encoder is that it's a transformer, and then the mask decoder is also a transformer with some other additional architectures on top of it. They don't go into a lot of detail here, but there's not a lot of detail to go into. Basically, I was thinking to myself when I was reading this, I wonder if the authors of Transformers Is All You Need knew how apt that title was, because all the largest models that we're seeing today, I mean, mainly because they're the largest models are in NLP, but like they're transformers in one way or another. I was even wondering if there's a point in trying to find additional like operations to improve architectures if we're just using transformers for everything. Maybe it's more about finding the right loss, who knows. So yeah, they have these different architectures. One important component of the model is that it doesn't output a single mask it doesn't output a single mask, it outputs 3 masks. And that actually is part of the way that they deal with ambiguity. So like, for example, you might have the example I gave before where a point is on a human wearing a hat on their face. So they say nested masks are often at most 3 deep. So they might have like a mask of the human that's out one of the training labels, and then the mask of the face, which is another training label, and then a mask of the hat, which is another training label. So they chose 3 heuristically, noticing that most of the time, like a point or a box will only have 3 masks in it. And they say over here during training, we only backprop the minimum loss over these masks. So the model is trained to output 3 different masks, and they'll take the one that has the lowest loss and train that one. Interesting element of it. And they said to train the model, which is that it's just training, it's learning to output segmentation masks, or a probability over masks actually. They used focal loss and dice loss, which I didn't look into, but I've seen before. Anyway, I would encourage you guys to look into if you want to know about them. I don't think I've seen an implementation of focal loss, and it's very simple loss, but I guess it works well for segmentation. And let's see, nothing else to report here. So the model is like a lot of basic architectures. They use a pre-trained vision transformer for the image encoder. Pretty simple. I'm sure there's a lot of details that aren't in here though. Maybe they're in the appendix, but that are like not really a contribution from a methodological point of view, but for what made or broke the method. You know, just those things that only the researcher would know about what works. Okay, let's talk about the data engine. So we know the architecture that they use, but the data engine, so their data collection method, let me just check the time, okay, had three steps. After this, I'm gonna try to like whiz through the results so there's time for questions. The first one is called assisted manual stage. And this is when there's a lot of existing work where they collect a data set of segmentation masks. And the way that they do it is the model will output a segmentation mask for a specific prompt. And then, as they say here, masks are refined using pixel-wise precise brush and eraser tools. So it's a pretty laborious process. Supposedly it takes like 34 seconds per mask. And they collected their first data set this way, like the first stage of data. Let's see, I don't know where they were able to collect 4.3 million masks with this first stage. And then their second stage I find very interesting, and it's pointing to a technique in this model that I'm like, this is so cool, which is what they did is they trained the model on the first stage data, and then they collected all the masks that the model was confident that it was correct in, where they have a method for assessing confidence. They say to detect confident masks, we trained a bounding box detector on all first stage masks using a generic object category. During the stage, we collected an additional 5.9 masks. So basically what the model does is it will say, okay, I'm confident of this mask. You don't need to look at it. We'll just use it as data. And then for what masks it's not as confident in, then can you touch those ones up? And so this way they were able to collect 5.9 million masks on an additional 180K images for a total of 10.2 million masks. And then here's the coolest part. The final stage is fully automated. They took the human out of the loop, and they're still able to generate like this amazingly useful and like accurate data set of segmentation masks. So they had two criteria for what it was a good mask. One was that the model was confident of it, that it was a good mask, and two, that it was stable, which means that they said, we consider a mask stable if thresholding the probability map at these ranges results in a similar masks. So they would basically see if we used a different threshold, would the mask stay similar? And then they filter out for duplicates. And so in the second stage, they had 10.2 million masks. In this automated final stage, they were able to create 1.1 billion masks. So literally, what is that? 100 times more data, fully automated by just having the first two stages being more automated. And then they actually trained their final model on only the fully automated data. So essentially, they trained a model and then created a data set off of that model, only using it. And they created a much more effective model that way. And I've heard of this technique being used before. I've never used it, where you essentially train a model, use it to label unlabeled data, and then retrain your model, and you get even better performance on your test set. And here's where I think they've taken, in fact, I've heard it in computer vision work before, but here's where they take that to like the nth degree. You're literally using you're only using automatically labeled data to train your model, and it works great here. So I thought that was really cool.
Is it sort of like unsuper, like essentially you use the human to filter out the big easy things, and then it sort of acts like unsupervised learning on it looking for some sort of structure in whatever is left out. Because why wouldn't it pick up just noise, right? Say we have a picture of trees, or you would expect at some point the leaves, or is this probabilistic hardening sort of a way to protect against noise being classified as a shape?
So actually, so the way I think of it, because I was wondering the same thing, Arvid, was the first stage, they're probably learning to classify, to segment bigger objects in the image that are easier, because they're using their pre-trained model, to suggest on little data to suggest that segmentation masks. The second stage, they're probably getting like those denser, those smaller image objects in the data set. And then in the third stage, the model has learned invariance for maybe some objects and some, or maybe for some backgrounds for finding objects. And because it's learned that invariance, then you have like this massive data set where you can increase its ability, like, so maybe you have an image of a cat in 10 different countries, and it's invariant to background for classifying cats. You can then take the other like 200 countries and show cats in it, and then you'll have a good segmentation map of a cat in all of those countries. And so you have even more variation to learn the invariance with. So that's what I was thinking, like, it's like the model learns to be good at some things, or invariant for some things, and then you can increase the amount of variance you see in your data to learn that invariance even more. I don't know if that's a good explanation, but I think that's how I've been thinking about it.
Yeah, sounds sensible, I would think.
Yeah, I was like, I wonder how we could apply this to NPLAN data, or if we have tried it in the past already, because there's some things that I don't do all research on NPLAN.
Sort of bit magic, right? Because you get some out for nothing, right? And that always is a bit mysterious. Now I think the only place where I've seen it before, I think, is in hierarchical clustering. Sort of find structures within structures just by doing that. But this is similar. You find the higher level clusters, quote unquote, and then try to find whatever structure is in there. But it must be and some quality of the image itself, of course. And would be interesting to understand what is it that it picks out. It must be like shapes.
Do you have any extra information, Peter, about this second point where they say second, by this stage we had developed the ambiguity aware model? Like, does that make a difference with this generation? So the thing you've highlighted first at the start of this stage, and then second, by this stage we had developed the ambiguity aware model. Is that like how it tells if it's done a good job?
The ambiguity aware model means that it's been trained on, for a single prompt, on multiple different, like to output multiple different valid masks. So maybe that ambiguity allows it to suggest on other images like a lot more valid masks or something along those lines.
Interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, I thought, oh, sorry.
No, good.
Okay, I was going to say, yeah, it does, as Arvid said, it does kind of seem like magic, but the proof is, I think the expression is like the proof is in the pudding, like it works. So this is so cool to me. Okay, I'm worried about time, so I'm just going to go over a couple of things that I think I just want to highlight and then open the floor for questions. Another thing that I'm seeing with these large foundation model papers, which I think is really good, is they address a lot of different concerns about the model, probably because they don't have to publish and they also have like a lot of resources. But like one of the things that they look into here is fairness and equality, like how the model performs on different like how representative the model is of our world, and how fairly how good its performance is on different groups of people. So here, really quickly, we can see that this is the data set SA1B that they collected, and they're looking at other data sets. And here, the majority of the data is actually from Asia and Europe. Whereas in most other data sets, it's either from Europe and North America. Still, Africa is very underrepresented by population. And then also, they also look at like the origin based on income. And again, low income countries are underrepresented. So that's one element that, but they make a good, they do point out that like based on existing data sets, their representation of different parts of the world is actually better or more an improvement in some ways. So that's good. And then they also look at how the model performs on for different groups of people. And they show that they're getting the one thing they say amongst the different groups of people that they look at, so here's feminine versus masculine, for example, the confidence intervals that they show always overlap with each other. So their argument is that because of the way they're training the model, it's actually a pretty fair model in terms of segmenting people even based on different based on differences between them. So I thought this was a good thing to include in the paper, and interesting to just show that the results are the same or similar. I don't know what these, oh, this is mean intersection of union. So this is percent of intersection of union. I'm not going to go over that metric because we don't have a ton of time, but I'm happy to answer a question of like, what is mean intersection of union if you have a question about it afterwards. Okay, and then we'll go quickly into the results. Yeah, we only have 10 minutes left and I want time for questions. Okay, what should I start with? Let's see if I, okay, there's one key thing that I wanted to highlight about the results, and then we'll open it up for questions. And if one of the questions is, can you talk more about the results, then I'm happy to. But there was another result in this paper, which I thought, oh man, this is a great paper for a number of reasons, was that in these segmentation problems in prior work, there's a number of metrics that are used to evaluate performance. And one of the main metrics is what's called mean intersection of union, which I guess I'll explain really quick. So mean intersection of union is like you sample segmentation masks from your probability distribution outputted by your model. And then for each one, you can calculate the number of pixels that are intersect with the ground truth. And then you can calculate the percentage of that. So one would mean that the masks are exactly the same. And the mean is just the mean over all the masks that are sampled. And so one interesting thing that they show on a couple of data sets is that the method that they're using, SAM, underperforms based on mean intersection of union. It's more shown over here. But when they ask a human evaluator to evaluate the segmentation mask that's been output by the model, it's always preferred. So it's a good example of how maybe the metric that we're using to evaluate performance isn't actually that good, because if you ask a person which model is doing a better job of segmenting the image, and I would argue that people are better at evaluating that than this calculation, that they say that SAM does better, so the model that they're using. So I thought that was really cool because it highlights how maybe sometimes the targets that we're using to evaluate our models aren't the ones we really care about. Unfortunately, they had to literally hire people to evaluate these models in order to get this better evaluation method, which is not something which really generalizes, which is something you can only do in a large corporation, unfortunately. Maybe they need to start creating like a charity for small organizations to be able to have like human labelers and evaluators. Another example of this, I just want to highlight it here, is so a problem that they also applied this to was edge detection, because if you can create a segmentation mask, you can obviously create the edge around it. So here's a couple examples of an edge detection data set, and you can see that the models are really general. I mean, the ground truth is really general, probably because it would take too much time to get all of the edges, to label all the edges. And then you can see what SAM outputs. And in this problem as well, they take some like models trained on the actual data set that they're doing edge detection on, and they outperform it. But they probably outperform it because they know to ignore all of these other edges, which SAM doesn't know how to ignore because it's not trained on them. Yeah, so this is another example where the model itself is probably outputting better results, but the metrics don't reflect that. And you can kind of see it based on like these examples that they're showing here. The other cool thing that is pervasive in all the results is that this model performs well even though it's not trained on the data set that it's being evaluated on, and it's being compared to models that are trained on the data set that it's evaluated on, that it's being evaluated on, and they have the same performance. Okay, that's everything for me for now. I hope there's some time for questions.
Do you know whether SAM has like an idea of these hierarchies, right? So if you look at the caterpillar, there, you have the segments of the caterpillar itself, that there is like some sort of understanding that these segments are actually part of the caterpillar, not just some abstract independent shape that is somehow in there.
So there's no semantic understanding in the model, or at least there's no semantic understanding based on it being inputted into the model. The model was only trained with prompts that were geometric. They did do one experiment, which is called, it's over here, zero-shot text to mask, where they also trained the model with text prompts, but they did it in such an interesting way. It was completely automated, again, getting all the text prompts, because they used this model called CLIP, where CLIP is a model that's trained to minimize the contrastive loss between an image embedding and a text embedding. So in theory, the CLIP image embeddings should be the same as the CLIP text embeddings. And so what they did is they just collected CLIP embeddings for all of the images and pretended those were the text embeddings. And then at test time, they used actual text to evaluate it. So there, because they're using CLIP, which and we know that language models tend to be semantically aware. That's like one of the points of them. Maybe that model was more semantically aware of like what these different components of the image are.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, a lot of stuff in this paper, and just for me, a lot of ideas. I'm seeing like repeated from other papers, but I thought it was really cool. I wish I had more time to present stuff, but yeah, I really encourage you guys to take a look. I think it's a very accessible paper because they don't go into a lot of the details of the techniques and the method being used. But yeah, how much time? We have 3 minutes. Are there any final questions before we stop? I'll scroll up to the top. Cool. One thing I would say is I've really upped this paper. They do have a section on limitations, and I encourage you to read it in case you want to do further research in this area or just understand where it does fail, because it does fail sometimes. And thanks everyone for coming and listening to this presentation, and have a good rest of your week.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter.
Bye-bye.